Good evening, everyone. My name's Alan Miller. I'm co-founder of the Together Association, and we're really pleased and excited to be here in Manchester. Big round of applause for the venue, everyone. We'd like to welcome all our friends around the world on Getter Live and on our platforms. This can also be seen at the J.A. Atherton in New Brighton, Dan Davis's great venue, live and around the world. So, without further ado, I am going to ask Daniel Zlupko to come up. He's the regional ambassador for us in Manchester. Please give a round warm for Daniel.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this on? Good. Yes, I am Daniel Zlupko, the Together Ambassador for Manchester. Welcome to this Together event, cost of a lockdown crisis. Hello to everyone in the room. Hello to live streamers as well. First, it's great to see so many familiar faces from the Manchester Together group. Also, it's great to see some faces from the other groups around Manchester. We all know each other. And it's really good to see so many new faces to me as well. I'm not claiming to know everybody in the world or around Manchester, but considering there's quite a lot of new faces in it, so that's really good and encouraging that the word Together is spreading around, so that's good. So thank you all for coming. Before we get into the main event with these great speakers, who Alan will introduce very shortly, just a few words from me. So hands up if you are a member of Together. Brilliant, well done, thank you. One of the topics I'm going to speak about is words of encouragement, and I would encourage you to join Together. I'm also going to speak about the Manchester meetings as well. So yeah, if you're not a member of Together, I would really encourage you to join. And if you are currently a member of Together but not very active, I'd encourage you to get more active as well. And why? Well, my reason is it's clear at the moment the general public is not being listened to, and in my opinion, democracy is not fully in place. We're seeing debates over matters such as COVID lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, effectively turn into a one-sided debate, a one-sided argument. No real clear debates that was had. We've also seen a Prime Minister put in place with no public vote whatsoever, and was currently seeing the likes of implementations of low-traffic neighbourhoods and 15-minute cities being put in place despite being mass public objection. So we're at a stage, I think, where the public are being told that MPs and local authorities are telling us that they know better and they know what's best for us. Well, I don't believe that for one. I think we should be listening to us a lot more than they actually are doing. So what can we do about that? Well, I'm kind of reminded of a Bob Moran-style drawing I'd seen many, many years ago. So a politician stood on a lectern. The lectern and the politician are balanced on a plank of wood hanging over a cliff. The only thing that's stopping the politician falling down the cliff is members of the public on the other side. Now, if you think that image through, what does it show? It shows the power of people. But unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people realise we do have that power. If a politician does not say what those members of the public actually want, and doesn't represent them, they've got the power just to walk away, i.e. not vote. And what happens? The politician falls off the cliff, i.e. loses their seat. The politician doesn't fear anything more than that. So, if there's only one person on that plank of wood, i.e. one member of the public, the politician doesn't have to listen. Public two, they still don't have to listen. However, if there's thousands, millions, the politician has to listen and will be held to account, which is why I encourage you to join Together. The more of us joining together, the more our voices will be heard, the stronger we are together, we can take back democracy together. Now, on that subject as well, in terms of joining Together, we do have Manchester meetups roughly every 4 to 6 weeks. And what we do, we talk about All Together Matters, campaigns that are going on at the moment. There's quite a few people in here who vouch for this. And we also do a topic every month that Together settles, which will define future Together campaigns as well. So our next meeting is the Britain's Protection Pub, just down the road from here, Wednesday the 15th of February. 7 p.m. Feel free, if you want some more details, feel free to give me a shout. I'll pass them on to you. My name's Daniel Zlupko, feel free. And most importantly about our meetings as well, we have a social side of it at the end of it. We can all get back together, talk about whatever we want, and you're surrounded by like-minded people who also realise democracy is under threat and our freedoms are under threat. So feel free to join us. Right, I shall hand over to Alan at the main event. Thank you.
Thank you. So, welcome everyone. It's fantastic to be here in Manchester, a place that has such an important legacy as an industrial giant, leading innovation, development, originally with the cotton and textiles, and then with the steam engine in the 18th and 19th centuries that enabled Britain to be the productive powerhouse that it was. Innovation and creativity were vital components of those times, and it is with this in mind that this evening's discussion can be informed, I think. Namely, what has happened to some of that can-do approach and that dynamism? We want to say thank you to Joanne and the Mechanics Institute, an important historical building. In fact, it was the small Manchester Mechanics Institute was established here in 1824, entirely through private initiative and funds, to teach artisans the basic principles of science by part-time study. It's also where the Trade Union Congress was launched here in 1868, and it is, of course, also the birthplace of another momentously important venue in Manchester that I was lucky enough to go to, which is the Hacienda. But I say that jokingly because we know that commerce and industry and entrepreneurial spirit and taking risks is very important, and often that is being limited and restricted and suffocated these days. So as we face these questions about strikes and industrial action today, many of us that have been campaigning in defence of our freedoms and rights, that so many sacrificed so much for before us, we do well to remember the efforts of all of those that were brave and were often demonised that enabled such rights and freedoms. So this is going to be painful, Jeremy Hunt told us. The same Jeremy Hunt that fawningly admired Chinese lockdowns and wanted more for us all. When we hear things are going to be painful from Mr. Hunt, we know who he means will be enduring the pain. It's going to be us and not him. We wanted to have this discussion in Manchester to address what we think we can do when faced with the cost of lockdown and cost of living crisis, a bit like Daniel was saying. Now, I've asked our panel, which we're really lucky to have join us this evening, to think about the part the public can play within all of this. As inflation continues to rise steeply and all of us are forced to tighten our belts, what happened to the idea of robust, dynamic productivity? What about abundant energy, readily available, cheaply for all, a bit like clean water is for many in many nations? Could we all be paid far more and have more wealth for all? Is disruption a key part of this? What are technological innovation solutions? And how far can we insist on the rights and privacy within that? Recent reports suggest it's almost 5 million people not working in Britain. The public sector, from passports to sewage and health, are often described as broken. Why is house building so sluggish? The government wants to impose new legislation, re-strikes, but locked down 3 times and had major restrictions with enormous damaging ramifications. They similarly want to do so with laws to protest. Meanwhile, the answer to transport in many cities, as Daniel was saying, was to see if we can limit things and restrict people, as opposed to have innovation and ingenuity to transform things. So I've asked the panel to think about a variety of these questions. It's a very tough task indeed. And we're going to get into it with all of you as well. So we'll be able to have a discussion and think about what we can do all of that. So firstly, closest to me is James Woudhuysen. And James is a visiting professor at the London South Bank University. He's a journalist and also an author of, among other things, Why is Construction So Backward? And Energised. Next to James, we've got Dominique Samuels, who will need little introduction to most of you. She's on every broadcast platform and channel, political commentator for Sky, BBC, Channel 4 and GB News, as well as on Getter. Dominique, I'm sure you'll agree, but I often find her very lively, brave and articulate in commentary on some of the culture wars, as well as having been a consistent voice for freedoms during lockdowns. And then, next to Dominique, we've got Hilary Salt, who's an actuary and a founder of First Actuarial, I can never say that properly, Actuarial, and provides consultancy advice and undertakes policy work in the public and private sector. I recently saw Hilary speaking in Derbyshire and was really, really impressed. So I'd love us all to give the panel a warm round of applause and welcome, Manchester style. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to James. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alan and Dan. I thought I'd bring you some news from London since I have that kind of voice, irritating manner. And the news from London is there's absolutely nothing happening in London right now. There's no rush hour in London. There's no dinner parties. There's no parties. Some people go through the motions of work, but basically it's closed down. There's no Friday night carousing. The hacienda is where it's at, and it's all very sad. So let me say that just in the title, people don't like to address the titles of meetings, but I do. This is going to be painful. It already is, big time, in London, and I'm sure in Manchester as well. We are becalmed with a torpor that is really unrivaled in my historical experience, which, as you will know, is extremely long. When we're looking at the cost of the lockdown crisis, ladies and gentlemen, we understand, don't we, that the cost is not something you can subject to a bourgeois cost-benefit analysis. Nevertheless, if you look at the £261 billion that Rishi dispensed during lockdown, the PPE sums of £9 billion that didn't work, the £28 billion on track and test that didn't work, the furlough fraud, 8.7% of all the furlough money went to fraudsters, that's 5.3 billion. Before we rush to say there's no money and all the strike demands are irresponsible, unacceptable and unpayable, we have to understand, don't we, that the cost can't be measured only in pounds, but if you do want to measure it, the scale of waste and the scale of mess-ups is quite extraordinary. And they want us to forget all of that, ladies and gentlemen. They want us to just push it to one side and forget that they did all the things that they did. All of those charts, all of those false statistics, all of those podiums costing God knows how much money. They want us to forget all of that. And when we do talk about it, they want to say that it's a blip. Ladies and gentlemen, it isn't a blip. The gas prices were rising before the Ukraine thing happened. The trends before lockdown were very clear for everybody to see. Lockdown only accentuated them. You take the book Nudge, published in 2008. That was the whole basis. Ian Ferguson's Polite, that people could be pushed around the way the Chinese Communist Party likes it. If you take the low traffic networks, the 15-minute cities that Daniel already rightly referred to, that restriction on mobility was already planned at a previous Congress of the Parties in 2015, where the architect of 15-minute cities and a basic lockdown for transport, ladies and gentlemen, was already strutting his stuff. You take remote medicine, the default position of Matt Hancock during the crisis. You take remote learning, which universities have tried to do for a very long time. You take remote work, plenty of it before the lockdown thing. All of those things show that lockdown only accentuated some of the corrosive trends in British capitalism, and it did not invent them. It was not a blip. It only extrapolated in a very fierce manner what was already happening. Take the 4-day week. In London at the moment, it's a 4-day holiday all week. There's only 1 day a week that anybody shows up. And that, in fact, was pioneered by obscure Iceland between, I don't mean the store, I mean the country. 2015 to 19, they're already experimenting with a 4-day week. And I once addressed the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, all these Tories, I'm sure there's some good Tories in the audience, I told them that a little old Russian guy I used to follow a bit, Leon Trotsky, he said the revolutionaries have to be the best workers. If you don't show up, you're going to get done by the management. If you slack, you're going to get done by the management. Now, I might not like the Protestant work ethic, everybody, but the fallout for me of the lockdown is nobody wants to do anything. Not the working class, we're still working away, but the middle class, the petty bourgeoisie, the NHS bureaucracy, the NHS trusts, all of them clinicians on 160,000 a year, they don't want to do anything. They've forgotten what Woody Allen said, that 95% of everything is just showing up. They don't want to show up. And that's something that we've got to fight, because we can be sure that unless we become the most active, loudest, and most vociferous, and most persuasive, that's the most important thing, opponents of the government, then Britain really will go even more to the dogs, because we can't look to these wasters with all their frittered away money and these technocrats to give us any kind of a future. What Dan said is right. The public has to come front and centre and start confronting these people in the way that Keir Starmer was confronted when he was asked, "What is a woman?" We need a few more of those googlies, really tough questions that we need to ask our politicians. And let me say, just to conclude, because I'm characteristically staying within my time frame, let me say that with your help, ladies and gentlemen, in energy, in transport, about working from home, about medicine, about all of these things, and in our rejection of all these modelers and their stupid charts, let me say that we will develop together. It's not just a physical struggle to get some of these people to listen to what we have to say, but we will together develop, ladies and gentlemen, a programme that goes for the NHS, for medicine, for technology, for innovation, for research and development, which we never hear about, for laboratories, which we never hear about. We can develop a programme that goes beyond next week's opinion poll. What a change that would be for British politics. That will not be quoted by YouGov, Ipsos, and say, "All right, now we've got to do a ricochet rishi, turn back the politics. We were floating it, now we're going to withdraw it, because what happens is, another opinion poll comes out." No, we need a medium and long-term programme to build all the things that the North needs, and also that the South and London and the South East needs. So plenty of deprivation there. So let's join together and work up our theories and our ideas, so we've got a persuasive alternative to these very boring Jeremy Hunt. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, I hope you don't mind if I'm sat down. Can everyone hear me at the back, or would you like to stand up? No. Sit down, is that fine? No. Stand? Alright, fine. I think for me, my position on this is I really like to go into sort of how this is done. Because I think what a lot of people don't realise, I think a lot of you in the audience actually do, what a lot of people don't realise is that we no longer actually have a government for the people of this country. Both sides of the aisle are completely captured by global interests. And if you talk about this, you are rendered a conspiracy theorist and silenced, you're called crazy. But the reality is, our government, and governments all around the world, they are tied to global organisations such as the World Economic Forum, such as the World Health Organisation, such as the UN, and even NATO. That's an established organisation that many people blindly support, but are largely behind the manufactured conflicts we're now seeing in Ukraine. And our media plays a massive role in actually manufacturing a response. So we do this firstly by creating fear, and we saw that during the COVID pandemic, forcing people to wear masks when we know we don't need to wear masks, forcing people to vaccinate themselves against their will, and if you've got the vaccine, fine, but together we believe that people should have the freedom not to subject themselves to taking medical injections, and we're even seeing currently that debate is still ongoing. And then step two is obviously creating a common enemy, and in that case, the common enemy was the unvaccinated. But I've noticed quite peculiarly in the media that there's a new common enemy that's being cultivated, and that is to make us all focus on what's going on in Ukraine. The narrative is Putin bad, Zelensky the second coming of Christ, when we all know that's obviously not the case. I wouldn't trust that man with anything. He's at the Golden Globes, he's everywhere. It's the oddest war I've ever witnessed in my whole entire life. Of course, if you say that, you're a heretic. And even I think amongst the Conservatives in the room, more controversially, I think we have manufactured an enemy in terms of the strikers, particularly with the rail strikes. Now, you can agree or disagree with the money that a lot of these, rail workers are on, particularly the train workers, or even about the productivity in the NHS. I'm not one to look at the NHS as sort of a religion, as so many people do in this country. You know, we were banging our pots and pans outside of the NHS, meanwhile we were sacking care workers for not taking the vaccine. However, I think we do have to be aware of how distraction tactics are actually used to stop us from actually focusing on the real issues. Even with this whole sort of chaos around Prince Harry, we're all talking about Prince Harry, so incensed about this guy that none of us know. Meanwhile, our government is sending 2.3 billion to Ukraine, suspending MPs for talking about the vaccine, calling him an anti-Semite, and importing people from all over the world and putting them in five-star hotels. Meanwhile, we've got homeless veterans on the street that can't get any recognition from this government. So these are things that we really do have to focus on. Because with the step one and the step two, which is obviously the fear and the creation of a common enemy, we forget the step three, which is that our economy is basically imploding. And call me a conspiracy theorist, but I do feel as though this has been manufactured. I mean, how could it not? How could it not be manufactured? The truth is, there is a plan globally. It's not just at the World Economic Forum, it's at the United Nations, World Health Organization, even the International Monetary Fund, or what have you, all of these global organizations. They have a plan, it's called the Great Reset, and a lot of people are scared to talk about this because of what the response will be. But the most powerful thing these people have over us is that they expect us to be scared and they expect us to actually care about what people think. And that's the first thing that you need to realise, that you should not be scared. Seeing the number of people in this room genuinely made me so happy in my hometown of Manchester, because it reminds me that no matter what the BBC says, no matter what, Sky News says, or even, publications like the Daily Mail and things like that do have some really questionable journalists that really pump out some really bizarre stuff during lockdown. Even though the mainstream media tells you that the general public thinks one way, I know, and you all know, that there are countless people that actually think the opposite. So in terms of what we actually do, there isn't a magic wand, but one of the things that these people rely on is obviously fear, but then again, it's also your compliance. And one of the ways that they expect us to comply is to sort of feed into the traditional system that we shouldn't protest, that we shouldn't be speaking about things online, because none of those things actually matter. But in reality, they do. If it didn't matter, why would they be rolling out the online statement bill that seeks to censor us online? Why would they be seeking to curb protests? Why would they be seeking to curb strikes instead of legislation? It's because all of these things matter, and they matter a lot. And I myself have become completely disillusioned with our, current political system. But I'd like to remind you that there is some sort of benefit in actually pressuring your MPs, whether it be pressuring them online or pressuring them via absolutely amazing groups such as this. Because I'll give you an example. Andrew Bridgen, probably all of the Conservative leaders. Yeah, an absolute hero. Amazing. He's had the whip removed for talking about the COVID-19 vaccine, and the magic word that he's thrown about is anti-Semite, despite the fact that he was quoting the Jewish Israeli cardiologist who said the vaccine rollout and the injuries associated with it have been the worst things since the Holocaust, and he said it was the Holocaust, but I digress. I saw him at the APG hosted by Dominique Samuels, and I said to the only 3 MPs that actually bothered to show up, we're not interested in your speeches. Your speeches are great, but nobody really listens to them. What we're interested in is you actually putting yourself out there and posting online. And since then, Andrew obviously thought, what the hell, I'll go for it. And now, so many people are talking about the issue of vaccination. So if we continue to pressure our MPs, we will get somewhere. The fact that so many people are waking up, I don't think this is the time to be negative, not comply, protest, and just continue involving yourself in groups such as this. I don't think it's going to magically change overnight, but I truly do believe that we can change the trajectory. So thank you all for coming.
is me stood up. It does feel, doesn't it, that this winter of discontent is really taking hold now as the public service strikes spread across the UK, and the real cost of living crisis hits people not just in things like fuel, but in things like the price of food and drink. 13% food inflation now, so that's really hitting home on ordinary people's lives. And it's really interesting, I think, that our politicians seem to regard all this as being something that's kind of beyond our control, that's caused by Putin's war in Ukraine, the recession as an unavoidable consequence of the pandemic. But at the same time, the one thing they really do want to control is action taken by ordinary working people to defend their standards of living. So Jeremy Hunt says, any action that risks permanently embedding high prices into our economy will only prolong the pain for everybody, stunting any prospect of economic recovery. And by that he means ordinary workers need to pay the price of the crisis by expecting less. Now, I don't think that's good enough, and I'm guessing most people here don't think that's good enough either. I think we need to explain better what's happening, why it's happening, to hold people to account, and to think about what effective action can we take to protect people against these painful measures being taken by government. So first of all, what's causing inflation? It's really hard, I think, not to be completely underawed by Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, saying that rising prices are caused by rising prices. Right, okay. And I think that kind of sense of impotence that's portrayed by all those people with their hands on the levers of power makes it quite hard to have any confidence that we really can change things. But I think we need to be really clear and hold people to account and say that, it's absolutely obvious that shutting economies off and on and off for 2 years, and with the threat of that hanging over us again, of course that's going to cause major disruption in the supply of goods. And we also need to factor in the fact that we've seen that massive expansion of quantitative easing led by the Independent Bank of England in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. They pumped around £900 billion into banks under that programme, and that's not money that's been used to invest in new industry. It's money that's been used to bail out zombie banks, bail out zombie companies, and create an asset bubble that's currently exploding here and across the world. So it's those real-world interventions, often led by experts rather than politicians, that really we need to lay the blame at their door. But I think we also need to take a much wider focus and say that the real problem for the UK is stagnant productivity growth. So if we today the assumption seems to be that it's got to be ordinary workers who pay for the crisis, from not just cuts in real wages, but by the fiscal drag of having fixed tax rates that mean that people pay more in their deductions from their pay packet. But last time we had this kind of level of inflation back in the 1970s, 25% inflation peaked at then. And actually we saw a rise in the real disposable income of workers in that period. And the reason was because at that point we had a much better improvement in productivity. And the real problem that we have to tackle now is how to address that productivity puzzle. Massively increasing our productivity would mean that we could afford to pay wage rises that reflect those increases in costs of living. But British productivity has been flatlining since the start of this century. This isn't a new thing. This isn't a COVID thing. This isn't a Putin's war thing. And reviving productivity growth so that people produce more outcome from the same or less time is a real vital precondition for a kind of high-wage, high-skill economy that some people have argued for. But, whatever Liz Truss thinks, that isn't produced just by cutting taxation. So in order to kind of create those new vibrant industries, We need to address that protracted decay we've seen in investment in British business, both in innovation and in new businesses. But also we need to accept that when we've seen big productivity growth in the past, it's not just because we've had new industries, it's because we've actually taken people out of those old, unproductive industries that are, dragging down the UK economy now. We need to accept that some of those zombie companies have to go. And part of that whole debate has to be, how do we rebuild our infrastructure? How do we rebuild transport and utilities? And I think the first part of that, the answer to that, is energy. People have mentioned energy already. We need cheap and secure energy. And that is not beyond our reach. We can do that by British-owned and built nuclear power. We can do it by fracking, and we can do it by accepting that in the short term we have to accept that fossil fuels will remain part of our energy strategy. Renewables and hydrogen will be part of it, but they can't be the whole answer. So if you're going to invent all that change in society, you're going to push through all that change, you need an open and democratic discussion about it with the British people. You can't push this down from the top. You also actually can't, I think, build it organically from the bottom, because it needs both planning and it needs buy-in. And I always think that, when people raise that really stupid question, name one thing that Brexit has achieved. And my first answer to that is always that it has revealed how shallow, inadequate and cowardly our politicians are. And how politics itself has been hollowed out, and we need to reinvent that. We need to reinvigorate democracy, and we need to re-engage the swathes of politically homeless. Finally, I've got time just on the strikes. I think it's just important to touch on strikes. And I think when we use that phrase, winter of discontent, it's important to note that actually the strikes today are very different to those of the 1970s. There's some people in this room will remember the strikes of the 1970s. I absolutely support the right of workers to take strike action to defend their living standards. A 5% pay rise when inflation is 14% is a 9% cut in your living standards. But I think the difference is that the strikes of the 1970s were about something much more than living standards. They were about who governs Britain. That was the slogan that the Tories used in the 1974 election. Who governs Britain? That's a really important question. And it's a question that doesn't really seem to be part of the strikes these days. I think the strikes these days are one day, the occasional day actions. They're not the same as those strikes of the 1970s where people put the whole of their livelihood on the line. They went out and they stayed out, and they recognised that there was a bigger question at stake in those strikes. It wasn't just about defending living standards. And I think many people who perhaps would be sympathetic to strikers these days do feel a bit annoyed by the frustrations of not having trains or not having paramedics on call. And perhaps don't feel as sympathetic to the strikers as they might do. But I think that is because there's a lack of confidence in those workers' actions. And I think the public would support them more if they felt that there was a much bigger message and people saw that bigger story and saw that there was something much more at stake. So, finally, I just wanted to say, to back up what everybody else has said, that I think it's really important that we look to ourselves to take action now. Whenever people say the government should do something, I kind of feel a bit worried about it, because we need to stop contracting out responsibility to other people. We need to start building something ourselves. We need to be braver, more hardworking and more determined, because this pain will not stop unless we put a stop to it. Thank you.
Thank you for those excellent introductions. So I suppose I want to come to this idea that it sort of touches both on what you were saying, Dominique, and what you were saying, Hilary. Hilary, it sounds like what you are calling for is a a national debate, but where not just a debate, but where the public is at the heart of it, about a whole range of things like infrastructure, energy, housing policy, all of those things. And where Dominique's concerns are that these globalist international influences, that they're having an impact on national leaders and everything. How would you see that kind of debate happen? What's it going to look like? What do we do to make it happen if we do? And is it a counter to what some of Dominique's concerns? Firstly to you, Hilary.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of those things are going on. So I know we've got some guys here from Politics in Pubs, you know, and I think lots of those little things are springing up. And people are starting to get involved in those debates locally, and those debates with different organisations, lots of different organisations. The challenge, I think, is how do you join all those things up? Because it feels to me there's lots of disparate things going on here, there, and everywhere. And how you build something that actually doesn't require everybody to agree with everything, but does say that there are certain principles that we need to build and organise around. That, to me, is the challenge. Because I actually think when you start talking to people and really, you know, it's no surprise that people, when they can't see what's going on, come up with all kinds of odd theories about what might be going on. I think that's a good thing because it shows they care and they want to understand. But I always think the more we talk, the more we examine ideas, the more we challenge ideas, the more we get to the right answer. And it's really how do we do that I think is the challenge.
Thank you.
I think when you were talking about that, the sort of thing that came to mind was almost like a bit of a town hall type scenario. You could do it sort of, not really a protest, but sort of like a march where, you know, so many people from these sorts of groups are in the centre of Manchester. When you're walking around Manchester, you see groups handing out flyers, talking to people, and really just trying to connect with members of the public to get more people sort of cotton on to what's actually going on. So I think actually being visible out in the real world as a collective is a real signal, because the internet is important, I will say. A lot of people look at the internet as sort of a vice of you know, my generation. I'm Generation Z and all the younger groups, but the internet is a weapon, actually, that is being routinely used against us. So the sooner that people actually understand the internet and how powerful it is, the better, because a lot of older people don't really know how it works, think it's a bit silly, but it's a very, very powerful weapon. If it wasn't a powerful weapon, then obviously they wouldn't be seeking to control it. So those two things, being visible, but also really understanding the internet, using it and recognizing its power, because you can, you know, not only connect with people in this country, but also connect with people globally as well, to sort of create that collective consciousness, being against this sort of globalist agenda that, you know, is coming thick and fast, and it's going to get worse over these next few years. So I think we just have to be aware of that, remain positive, and just be visible, I would say.
Thank you. James, you talked a lot about the different sectors and the areas that were have been impacted, and also about the spend, the sort of magic money tree, let's say, but there was the ability to spend money when people made a decision to do that, and how much it was. Hilary calls it a protracted decay over the century. I'm wondering to what extent just saying we need something is enough. You know, I think you used the term zombie companies and quantitative easing that was used after the last global slump. So what's needed in your opinion? What's the relationship between what the public can do and the whole idea of saying, right, we're going to have proper R&D, proper investment? What does that look like? And I've noticed just that Mick Lynch was saying that he's never going to accept driverless trains. And I wonder why you couldn't have a situation where you had a transformative system of investment and development where people are retrained and that type of thing. But how do you see the public within all of this in terms of these kind of big things like investment, development, what it's going to mean? You know, how do you see that?
Well, it's very interesting, Alan. You've anticipated some research that I've done on my train that was 40 minutes late. And And that is this, that if we want a new normal, our kind of normal, not their kind of normal, we can't pretend, can we, whatever position we take on strikes, we can't pretend that the rail workers or even the health workers are on anything other than a hiding to nothing if they hang around with a few banners and half a copy of a wet socialist worker out in front of a strike venue and think that that's going to win a strike for the working class in the 21st century. You know, it was a bit boring back in the 70s, if you were alive at the time, and it's very boring now. You know, it's not going to win anything. Now, underneath all of that is a complacency, not just about the internet, or what I think you're quite right to say, is, Dominique, about visibility in the real world, not just the virtual world, right? Completely right about that. But what we don't get from the RMT, and I like Mick Lynch's drubbing of Channel 4, I'll pay any money to see him put their news people down. It's great. I like his position on Brexit. But we also know that Mick Lynch favoured severe police action on masks and lockdowns on the railways. And we also know, don't we, that when it comes to exactly this discussion that Hilary rightly raises about productivity, I've yet to see an information graphic from the RMT in 2023 arguing against one-man operation. I've yet to see from them what I've learned, which is that according to Network Rail plans, they want to cut the number of routine maintenance work done on the railways by 50%, getting rid of 2,500 jobs, right? Now, it may be safe, like one-man train operation might be safe, but where are the animations, ladies and gentlemen? Where's the information graphics? Where's the numbers? Where's the persuasive power that could say, we are willing to raise productivity, we want to have retrained people, we want all these guards cleaning out the loos to be working on train software and all the rest of it for a robotised train service that's really great. We don't hear that from Mick Lynch. In fact, the only piece of good news I saw recently about that, and it's only one sector, is that Andy Burnham and Nicola Sturgeon are now arguing for a bit of a train service going up to Scotland. Well, what a revolutionary prospect. I mean, honestly, can you imagine crossing the border by the railways, you know? But now, if that's what we've got to look forward to as our leadership, Burnham and Sturgeon, to actually move around the country, then we can forget all about it. So let's make concrete what Hilary says about productivity rises. Let's discuss it in all of our industries and say what's fair, what's not safe, what's proper, what could really technologically revolutionise the industry. And that way I'll be up here next time on time rather than 40 minutes late, which is what Britain is becoming.
So I want to take this a little further though, right? So let's talk about the government and any opposition or anyone, or even ourselves. What we've seen in space travel is that there was an end to it. And then some entrepreneurs came along and did perhaps some of the things that NASA and the state were not prepared to do, or they used some of their technology, they used innovation. Now, people may like or not like what's being done about that, but I think that there's been an exciting discussion, like with travel, bullet trains, different possibilities, the idea that anything's possible if we can innovate and transform things. And yet, what's the relationship there as you see it then, Hilary, right? If you've been you put your finger on a number of issues about the problems in the economy with a lack of productivity. To take James' point and Dominique saying, you get out there, you talk, how would you see us? Would it be like a manifesto, put pressure on the leaders? Or say, not to put words in your mouth, but if you're not able to do it, get out of the way. I mean, how do you then encourage and inspire that kind of approach to productivity? And considering it hasn't been around for quite a while.
Yeah. So I think to me, when you look at where might innovation come from, it feels to me that there's three sectors in the UK that can really motor that forward. One is our universities and our further education colleges. And I think, they have been captured not just by the whole culture wars issues, but also by a focus on turning out people to get jobs. And I think reinventing the whole innovative spark in our universities and the need to research and push that research forward is key to that. And I actually think there are a lot of people in our universities who are keen to do that. And I think, just as Dominique said, being visible in those sectors as well and talking to those people is part of what we need to do. Government has to be involved in this. I think when you look at any of the big infrastructure projects, the private sector cannot do it on its own. It needs government to be involved. So we need to find ways in which we can build those kind of structures that allow government and universities to work together, and also work with the private sector. And it kind of worries me nowadays that all these kind of areas they're very kind of sectarian. They kind of almost don't work together, don't talk to each other. And I think, there's an extent to which businesses, private sector businesses, employers need to step up to the mark in innovation, in training, in investing in the future. And instead, so many of our businesses are just interested in very short-term focused. How do we turn a profit today? And I think there are debates we can have around things like the way in which businesses are owned, the way in which our taxation system works, all those kind of things that sound very boring and dull. But actually, again, I think we talk about the idea of having some town hall meetings to really push forward, because I think people have great ideas in all these areas, but they have just got to the stage where they think, there's no point me saying anything because I'm just weighed down by the whole, decay in society around me. And I think, when we say, what's wrong, some of the difficulties with some of these strikes is that they're in industries that are bloody failing anyway. You don't expect a train to be on time. You don't expect a paramedic to come. And that's why, the strikes are less effective than they might be. Let's just let's talk everything up in the air and start having those conversations about how we rebuild that creativity. As Alan says, if you look in the Northwest in particular, we have changed society in the past. And we can do that again.
Dominique, one of the things that people often talk about young people today as though they're either overly inflating them or being really patronising. But often like they're all snowflakes or whatever. I did read a very worrying statistic that 1 in 10 young people now think that they don't think they may ever want to work. What do you think? Well, it was an interesting piece in The Spectator. I wonder, but what my question to you is, in terms of, not that you're the spokesperson for all young people, but from your point of view as a young person, but generally in society, how do you think about how younger people are thinking about some of these things and the influence that they can have on things and shape it, and to what extent?
I think there's two sides. So on the one hand, the new sort of way of being a rebel is actually to display breathtaking levels of deference towards government. We now think it's cool to believe everything that the government tells you to do, and we also think it's cool to wave the flag for, the military industrial complex and big pharma, which I think is absolutely odd because, back in the day, it was the young people that were actually supposed to be the rebels. So there's that aspect of it. We're almost being conditioned to rely on daddy government. And that will obviously come in the form of, things like a universal basic income, a 15-minute city, this whole idea of necessity. If you don't need to drive 15 minutes out of your city, then there's no reason as to why you should, so therefore the government should restrict that. And all of these things are actually being conditioned to make sense to young people through the TV that we watch, through the apps that we consume, and that's why we're saying that the internet is such a powerful weapon. Take TikTok, for example. Much of the government sort of message with regards to the lockdowns and masking, that was actually disseminated to young people through those sorts of apps. So there's that. Then on the positive side, there is sort of an era of young people that know that the internet is the future and have sought to sort of monetize that in a way. So I think you could look at it from two sides about the not wanting to work, because I think the future is the entrepreneurs, the creatives, those that understand that things are going to be extremely digitalised in the future. So in some way, we're going to have to work that to our advantage and actually have control over it, rather than allowing, your big government and your massive corporations to control it. So I think it's about sort of having to adapt in a way that is people powered and not allowing the governments from above to have control over it. So it's a difficult one. I think that the only thing we can do is to sort of shift the narrative, because all of the people my age, we're getting our information from, as I keep sort of hammering on about, the internet. And I think the idea that universities are the future, I think that's rubbish now, because I think these institutions have become sort of almost like brainwashing institutions, where people are just being conditioned to have this sort of hive mind and not really question the narrative. So to all the people that have children, this might be controversial, but the idea that you have to go to university, I think nowadays is a big no-no, because I think it's an affront to actually free thinking, in my view.
So, James, we're going to come out to the audience in a minute. I want to get you to ask some questions or come in and contributions. But in terms of investment, research and development, having a far more ambitious and robust approach to it, whether it's in energy or 10 million new houses or whatever, how does that come about? Is it that it's just demanded and asserted? Do you see that there's a way of, what I'm really asking is, have we had so many years of sluggishness and a lack of commitment to these things that even when you assert those things, the people that could perhaps shape some policy that direct things in that direction are not going to do it? I think it was Nick Clegg that said, 2006, well, if we really invested in nuclear energy, it would take us till 2022 to become energy independent, right? Is it just about asserting? Is there other ways of doing it? Just some thoughts on that.
Well, I was very struck by Daniel's introduction, where, if I had my 19th century history right, the TUC, it's a bit different from today's TUC, which would not be difficult, was intimately bound up with the scientific movement in Manchester and with innovation. And we need to remember that before the Second World War, there was a substantial autodidact tradition in the working class, where workers would meet to discuss Shakespeare, science, and all kinds of things. Now, we're not in the 30s, but it seems to me when I called for good RMT animations, the information design that we can do, the statistics that we can collect, the checking with each other and the combat with each other to clarify our arguments, not just to join the dots about the Great Reset and about individuals and organizations, but to look above all at their ideas. I think if we do that, then we can actually put forward a program that can gain popular support. So, when I wrote a book about energy, it wasn't called The Future of Energy. It was called Energize, about energizing the population to have the numbers, to have the arguments, to have the scientific background. I nearly said the science, which is a terrible thing. No, let's not have that. But the scientific background, where you can really argue for things. Now, it's time we did that. These are not narrowly scientific and technological questions. When you say that the intermittency of a wind turbine is such that they can only be on about 40% of the time, that's political, guys. That's important, because it's a difference between Manchester actually having a power cut or you being able to walk the streets at night. That's important where I come from. It's important for women. It's important for old people. It's important for me getting here from the station. I want the lights to be on, and I know they won't be on with wind turbines. So now lots of people may rush in now and say, yeah, but, they took 40% or 60% of our electricity last week. That was last week, folks. Right? So we need to be able to anticipate those counter arguments and beat them. And that's something that's not very English, folks, right? We don't like that Descartes stuff, Hegel, arguments, ideas, combat. It's down the pub for us. But, we still need to go down the pub, but it's a time to think about a bit more broadly and a bit more scientifically and more vividly so that we can get these arguments across. I'll just finish, Alan. I'm just doing my homework, right? The way they're going to raise productivity on the railways, was it something I said, lady? No? The way they're going to raise it is they're going to have what used to be route availability 10, which means that you could take 25.4 tons on a piece of railway. They're going to lower it so you can only take 22.8 tons and we're still going to be fine, right? So all the bridges and the rails and so on, they're going to be derated. So basically we can go across this bridge and it won't have to be reinforced because we can get away with it maintenance free, and it doesn't matter if the load's something that we can't bear. We can only rate it at 22 tons rather than 24. That's the way forward for productivity in this country. That's the way to get to Scotland. Sweat the acid, right? And if it happens to go down in the Tay Bridge disaster all over again, tough. The Tories weren't there, and Sir Keir wasn't there. It's not their fault. They're not responsible. We're responsible, right? No. If we can get tough like that, then we'll really have them cowering in the aisles, and that's what we need.
Okay. I'm going to ask, we're going to go in this order, and then I'm going to say some things at the end. So you can pick any one of those things or anything else you want to round up. Just no more than you've got just over a minute. It's an impossible task. But everyone, Danny's going to tell us where we're all going to the pub afterwards. So we're going to carry on talking and all of that informally and rowing maybe. James.
Well, I just want to say that, some colleagues have mentioned cancel culture. And, it's time we started calling that reprisals culture, right? They want to close down debate. They don't want us to remember what they did during the lockdown. They do want us to succumb to presentism, where you can't see a nice future, you just repudiate the past, and you close down debate all the time. Now, it's no good just calling for debate all the time. We need concrete actions and we need concrete demands and proposals, a new programme for energy, for innovation, for productivity, for the trains and all of those. But if we don't strike back against the reprisals culture and call it out, we'll be denied even that. That's arguably the most important thing facing us now. If we lose the right to free speech, we've really had it. We won't even get to the violence question, right? So we've really got to be very firm about it and not concede, not apologise, any of these things. As it happens, I think Andrew Bridgen was an idiot saying what he said. Do I want him deposed for what he said? No. I want to take him to task about the Holocaust. I know it was a Jewish doctor that he spoke to and all of that, but it's still, he has the right to say and be an imbecile. And if he wants to do that, that's fine. We have to uphold that and say no to reprisals culture.
Thank you, James. Dominique.
So the first one was about...
it was chinks in the armour for the press. If you think there are ways of doing things that can get through under the radar, maybe like we did with the vaccine mandate, but anything, you've got lots of experience with this.
Yeah, I think through my experience, I think a lot of broadcasters in the mainstream media, they quietly actually agree with what people are saying. Same with MPs as well, actually. They quietly agree with a lot of what we're saying in here. But it's that fear of ridicule, it's fear of being cancelled because of cancel culture and the current attack on free speech. The issue is everyone always waits until it's safe. I've been a victim of that as well, waiting until I think it's sort of safe to say things. When the lockdowns were really going full throttle, that's when I thought, F that, I don't care if it's safe or not, I'm going to say what I think. And I think that's the situation in the media at the moment. But what's good is that, you know, there are alternatives, but I don't think we can ever really rely on the media to fully represent us because they are motivated by a profit model, which means that they always have to strike in the middle. And we're also heavily regulated by Ofcom, which was largely responsible for a lot of the uniformity that we saw in the media, where they were just parroting one pro-lockdown narrative, and that was the government's narrative. It was Ofcom that was enforcing that. So we do have to look to alternatives. There are alternatives. Direct people that you know that may not be as exposed to different sorts of information to alternatives online. I mean, there's Rumble, there's Twitter, there's Instagram if you don't get censored on there. There's Facebook if you don't get censored on there. But there's also Getter and things like that. There's loads of alternatives. More people are actually watching things like YouTube and Rumble and Twitter than they are on mainstream media or watching the newspapers, so reading the newspapers. So I think you also have to be aware of that. Just lastly, I know I'm sort of going over, but, you know, I don't think that everyone who doesn't agree with me, you know, is brainwashed. I think that is sort of a very narrow way to view it. But I think, in my personal opinion, there has been a top-down effort to brainwash people. I do think that has been an agenda, which was why the government's very own scientists said that our media messaging was, you know, authoritarian. And I do think that a certain level of incompetence can be accidental, but the scale at which we're seeing this incompetence, I don't think that's accidental. You're not crazy for thinking there are patterns. In fact, you're probably right. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Dominique. Hilary.
So it's really interesting that the kind of the time when there sparked a bit of controversy in the room there was about this discussion around vaccines. And I think the thing we need to do there is to really set the bar high for ourselves in saying that when we disagree, we shouldn't just assume, you know, the other person is wrong. We shouldn't just say that, you know, people are brainwashed or sheeple. We should engage in real, rational debate with each other and show each other the respect of having that debate. Because if we can't respect each other, then, you know, we're not setting the right standard for the way in which politicians have been treating us for the past few decades. So let's rise to that challenge. Let's recreate that belief in rational human agency and the ability to work collectively to make the world better.
Well, yeah, carry on giving a big round of applause, please, for the panel. Also, thank you to Phil and Liam from Oracle Films, who've made some remarkable work as well, but they're doing a live stream. Thank you to Getter. I want to say a few things just by way of summing up and to answer one or two of the questions. COVID-idiots, gammons, stupid, sheeple, all of those words, I think we need to jettison them. We know what it's like when they try and talk. They're all the conspiracies, the anti-vaxxer, all those words. What we need to do is win hearts and minds. And together, we've got people who've been vaccinated and unvaccinated because it was all about choices. It was about privacy and freedom and the ability to have our own autonomy and not have things imposed on us. And we united around those things. And we unite around the idea that we should have a voice and the public should be at the centre of things, whether it's on our streets with LTNs or in 15-minute cities, or if it's to do with what we're doing in the country. Not that the markets say that this has to happen, but what do we need and how can we get that? And to the question about whether, you know, if people should stand independently and everything, we're very encouraging for people to take as much of a role in active life, and that's why we want people to join us as members, to get involved as local and regional ambassadors, as Daniel and others are doing up and down the country. We've got some great hubs and we want to grow more. A lot of people are politically homeless. You know, we're seeing a lot of people around the anti-LTN campaigns, for instance, that were in the Labour Party or sort of still affiliated, that are actually furious with what's going on there. And I think that we all have to be open-minded and we all have to have courage. And courage is also being prepared to listen and not shout down other people. Courage is coming up in a room when most people think one thing and saying something different in the spirit of winning someone over to your point of view and being prepared to be wrong or right, and trying to win over the hearts and minds. And if we can't go into a pub without calling people stupid or sheeple, which is probably going to get us into a fight, if we can't go in there and try and appeal to our fellow citizens and win them over on the democratic spirit and the idea that we should be free and we should decide and we've got common interests and common purpose, then we've got a massive problem. So we together, that is our starting point, that we've got common interests, that if we remember the fear, and there was propaganda and there was nudge and there was attempts to psychologically kind of put us in certain things, but also we can win hearts and minds. And we are now in a very different position. And just on this point about what can be done in the media, for a long time people ignored us, but we kept banging on the door and we kept putting ourselves out there. And then eventually we got some of those kinks in the armour and we got in and we started getting on Good Morning Britain and BBC Breakfast, and with the vaccine mandate, you and we and all of us in Britain stopped it. And our friends in New Zealand and Australia and Canada said, we don't think you're ever going to do that. The second we stopped it here, it ended many things around the world. Remember, what we do here locally, what we do here tonight, when we go out to our community and we talk to our colleagues, our friends, our workmates, our family, and win them over, that has a huge impact here, and that has an impact across the country, and that has an impact internationally. So let's be our sovereign selves. Let's insist on democracy and freedom. Let's win hearts and minds. Sometimes you might have to insult someone, but in the spirit of winning them over, let's try and listen and have the better arguments, whether it's about productivity or it's about development, it's about our needs. And let's go out and win the hearts and minds. Let's go out and win this battle for freedom and democracy. Let's say we're not going to live in a technocratic prison. They always fall back. They U-turn and they collapse when they come under pressure. They aren't that strong. The problem is we don't believe enough in ourselves and what we can do, and we haven't gone and won enough people. Let's do that together. Let's make it happen. Let's make 2023 ours. Thank you very much, everyone.